Today, I'm speaking with Dr. Wei-Cheng Lin. Dr. Lin is an associate professor of art history and Chinese art and architecture at the University of Chicago. He's an expert in the art history of medieval China, particularly Buddhist art and architecture and China's funerary practices through history. He's also the author of Building a Sacred Mountain, the Buddhist architecture of China's Mount Wutai. In this conversation, he teaches me about the emergence and growth of Buddhism in medieval China through the case study of one of the oldest and most prominent sacred Buddhist sites in the whole of the Middle Kingdom. Without further ado, my name is Sebastian Weatherby, and this is The Tell. Dr. Lin, thank you for taking the time to talk with me.
Sure, yeah, my pleasure.
There's a quote from your book, from Ge Hong: "All mountains, whether larger or smaller, have gods and spirits. If the mountain is large, the god is great. If the mountain is small, the god is minor." And I wanted to start by asking what the mountain represents in medieval China.
Well, obviously the quote was from the Han Dynasty, a little bit earlier than medieval, yeah. So, but I think the mountain worship started actually very early on.
Yeah.
As early as the earliest written history that we could find.
Yeah, there's
so
already
that's already there. Yeah, and then we also saw the depiction, kind of very rudimentary kind of depiction of mountains in bronzes, for example. So from very early on. So how it started, we don't really know. But the Chinese civilization started from the Central Plain, where you don't really have, it's actually pretty flat terrain. You don't really have kind of very prominent mountains around. But then you go away from there, then begin to see the mountains to the west, to the north especially.
Yeah.
So I think, the mountains in antiquity in China was more kind of very prominent topographical features or burial. So beyond that point, it became kind of all mythical, and then it's really unknown territory.
So it's like the edge, kind of.
Something like that. Yeah. So in order to go beyond, then you have to encounter other creatures. Probably the unknown stuff. So I think that's probably the early kind of imagination of mountains. And also there's some mythical mountains to the western extreme of China's territory, and there's some others to the east extreme of the China's territory. So they are beyond the territory of China proper.
Yeah.
So I think, I think you're right. The mountains are more or less located on the edge or close to the edge of the territory that has been known or kind of being governed under the emperor.
And then would there be sort of a heavenly association as well, just due to the height?
That's right, yeah. So I also mentioned about that in my book early on. For example, when the first emperor kind of after conquering all the neighboring states, and then he declared himself as emperor, ascended to the throne. And the next thing that he did was to go visit all the prominent mountains, and then kind of make announcement to the heaven that now I am the emperor. So I'm under you, but at the same time I'm kind of in the middle between the heaven and earth. I am the person who governs the land. So I think that's kind of the gesture. And then this kind of the ritual was practiced all the way down to the last dynasty.
And that seems like it echoes this idea that the mountain is also a place to interact with heaven or with the divine, with the supernatural.
Yeah. So, for example, the most prominent mountains throughout Chinese history are known as the Five March Mountain. So that M-A-R-C-H March Mountain. So they are kind of the most important, and then they are located in four the cardinal direction, east, west, north, south, and one in the center. So yes, like the quote that you read, they are the kind of the largest mountains that are considered as landmark. And then because they are so tall and then have extraordinary topographical features. Yeah. So oftentimes when the emperor, when he became the emperor, also in the following Chinese dynasties, every emperor ascended to the throne, will try to make an effort to go to at least these kind of March Mountains to make a kind of announce that, now from now on, I am the person who governs.
Could you introduce what Mount Wutai is to people who have probably never heard of it?
Okay, yeah, sure. So the origin of the religion Buddhism was in ancient India, right? So and then from the early sutra texts, there were records about mountains already, but those mountains more in the kind of imagination of Buddhist view of a universe.
Yeah.
You know, for example, there's one in middle that's so tall that it will support all the heavens. So there's a records about that. But in the indigenous culture of India, the mountain worship was not so developed.
Yeah.
Whereas in China, prior to the arrival of Buddhism,
it was already well established.
That was well established already. So Mount Wutai was recognized by Buddhists as the first sacred mountain of Buddhism in China. So that's kind of very interesting that, you know, China always considered itself as the center of the world. So when you say China, in Chinese, 中国 literally meaning it's a nation in the middle of everything, right? So once Buddhism was transmitted to China, they realized China was not at the center. India was the center.
Right. Suddenly the religion that's coming in and taking over, it localizes the center somewhere else.
Yeah, exactly. So from the 2nd century all the way to the 5th century CE, during those times, a lot of pilgrims they really went through a lot of difficulties to reach India, because they want to see the land where the religion started. They want to see the monuments and places where the Buddha visited. But then, you know, all of a sudden around the 5th and 6th century, the recognition of a Chinese mountain being the dwelling place of a Bodhisattva kind of started. Right,
and this is sort of alongside the emergence of the Tang?
I think it's right before then. Okay, you know, there's already a very eager and also earnest search for a Buddhist presence in China. Right? And then it just happened one day. There's a sutra that was translated into Chinese. It's called Huayan Sutra. And then in the sutra, there's a chapter that talks about different dwelling places of bodhisattvas. And one of them is located in the northeast of India, right? So think about China is located to the northeast of India. And then there's a mountain that's very tall and high. And then the peak of which it was always covered by snow all year round. Right. So Chinese Buddhists kind of thought that, you know, the mountain designated in the sutra could have been in China. So then they kind of tried to find it. And then eventually in the approximate region, to the kind of in the northeast of China, was recognized and then identified as a place where a lot of people, when they would visit the mountain, kind of saw the kind of appearance of the Bodhisattva described in the sutra. And, with a respect to mountains that is so much in the tradition of China. So people begin to make the linkage. The vision of the Bodhisattva with kind of the God or, you know, the divine of the mountain.
Was there a lot of tension between Buddhism and traditional Chinese religions as it sort of crept in?
So of course, you know, the Bodhisattva for Chinese was considered as foreign, right? So it's a foreign deity. All of a sudden, it was there. And then in the early text about the sacred mountain, about Mount Wutai, there was a lot of episodes talking about the Bodhisattva in the disguise of a person or different kind of characters. Ran into the mountain deity. And try to convert the deities, the mountain deity into Buddhist. Right? And then, or, you know, or there's another episode where, there's a local god who was kind of ill to some, or kind of similar kind of situation. And then Bodhisattva just gave him something to eat. And then after eating that, and then the local god was healed. So it's a kind of, you begin to see how kind of the tension and relationship between Buddhism and then the local deities begin to form a confrontational kind of relationship into something that's an integration of the local religion. And also Buddhism was considered as kind of large religion, you know, the religion that could be anywhere. right?
Right.
Buddhism. Yeah. But the local gods were recognized only in a local area. So it's kind of minor religions. So it's kind of the typical history that happened between the major and then the local or minor religion components, the kind of encountering each other, and eventually kind of how the local religion were taken over by the major religion. So and then that's precisely what happened among Wutai. Yeah.
When you started writing your book, what was your goal initially? What did you want out of it?
Yeah, I am an art historian who works on architecture a lot, right? So and Mount Wutai was so important precisely because we just described the first sacred mountain of Buddhism in China. And then the mountain provides an access to the religion locally in China. So the Buddhists didn't need to go all the way to India in order to find the presence of the Buddhist divine, right? And actually during the Tang Dynasty, a lot of Indians, Buddhists, went all the way to China to visit Mount Wutai.
Oh, really?
In order to see the presence of, so you can see how that worked.
Yeah, there's like a shifting center. That's right. Like a new pole.
That's right. Yeah. So China all of a sudden becomes part of this a broader Buddhist world, and can also be considered as a second center or one of the centers, right? Yeah. So Buddhist, the sacred mountain was not only being recorded in a text, but also depicted in many different forms. And then the majority of those representations that we still have are in the caves inside the murals. So there's for example, there's a site to the western side of China. It's called Dunhuang. There's other caves in there. And then the several murals in those caves were representation of the sacred mountain.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So you have the sacred mountain being depicted, and then the bodhisattva flying above the mountain. So I actually, before knowing about the physical mountain itself, I started studying those representations. Yeah, I did a paper about that, and eventually I realized that the importance of the mountain. Yeah. So I began to became curious about how this process happened. Yeah. In which a local mountain or a natural terrain. Yeah. In China were converted or reconfigured. And built into a sacred mountain. Yeah. So the book is called Building a Sacred Mountain, and then in the book I try to trace the major temples, the construction projects taking place throughout the Tang Dynasty as a way to not only just convert the nature of the mountain, but also reconfigure the way people understood the mountain itself. So,
what would people see when they actually go today to the mountain?
So the center of Tang Dynasty was in the Chang'an area. Today is Shanxi province. Yeah. Yeah. And then the Mount Wutai versus the capital would be to the northeast of the capital, in Tang territory. But today, if you want to go to Mount Wutai, you can take a train, high-speed train. Yeah. Go to the Shanxi province and then hire, or just hire a cab driver and it will take you over there. Yeah. And I think there's a public transportation for you to go all the way to the kind of mountain gate. Of the sacred mountain.
And what's that experience like once you get there? What do you see?
Today, unfortunately, it has become more tourist, right? So, but at the same time, I think if you really just spend time going through the Mount Wutai literally means the mountain of 5 terraces or 5 mountain peaks. Yeah. So the rather than one single mountain, Mount Wutai actually refers to a cluster of mountains, right? So they have the prominent 5 kind of peaks, and then the 5 peaks will come together to kind of encircle a mountain area, and that's what we call Mount Wutai.
Okay, yeah.
So today, if you go over there, you can travel from peak to peak. Yeah. Right, and then at the center of which is a town where from the Tang Dynasty was kind of the center of the 5 peaks. Of course, all the buildings have been rebuilt already in the past probably 600 or 700 years. So you don't really see any traces of Tang Dynasty. Yeah. So there's only 2 buildings that still standing from that have the origin in Tang Dynasty.
Yeah.
Otherwise, most of the buildings have been rebuilt already. But still, you can see, how the buildings and then the mountain terrain, and then, also the views. So for example, if you go to the central town of the mountain range, look around, you can see 5 peaks, right? So kind of the topographical situation, the mountain terrain that you can see today, very much still the same. During the Tang Dynasty, they were seeing exactly what you can see today.
What did the evolution of what the Buddhists were building look like? If initially, did it start with monasteries? Did it start with monasticism, or did that sort of emerge over time? From
the records that we know, if you take the Mount Wutai as an example, early on, probably they were only kind of small temples, kind of built by individual monks. For example, there's records about, a few monks who had a vision in their dreams. Seeing this mountain.
They kind of felt compelled.
They feel kind of compelled to go over there and start the practice there, right? So, but when the mountain's fame began to grow, and then the cult of Mount Wutai was spread, and eventually the mountain actually received out of imperial sponsorship.
Yeah, I was going to ask about that actually. Yeah, whether it was something that imperial authority approved of or not, whether it was...
So eventually the, for example, close to the end of the 7th century, Mount Wutai was recognized by the court. Then, based on the records that we have, the capital city was the most important Buddhist center, just because other Buddhists, they came from the west for eventually arrive, the capital, and then, the ruling family, most of them were very devout Buddhists. So in the capital, there's a quarter, a section where the foreign monks will welcome and then will be accommodated.
Was there a period of more resistance before that?
I think Tang Dynasty actually, Tang Dynasty is really the prime of Buddhism, I would say. And once you pass Tang Dynasty, Buddhism was still very important, but just the kind of sponsorship, the kind of the prominence in all the dimension of the society began to wane a little bit. So over time it became part of Chinese culture, but at the same time it never really regained the importance like what you were seeing in the Tang Dynasty. Right. So during Tang Dynasty, then the Mount Wutai was recognized outside the capital city, the most important Buddhist center. Right. So from right before the Tang Dynasty, so the 6th century, early on 6th century, there's a few records about the individual monks living in the mountain, and then get to the end of 7th century, it became the most important Buddhist site outside capital city. So it's only about 150 years.
So it kind of blew up fairly quickly.
That's right.
From those sort of initial early temples that sort of individual monks were questing out and starting on their own, what did it look like once it sort of became more institutional, I guess?
Well, in terms of form, the architecture tradition itself was quite consistent, and then throughout the entire medieval period. So from visual representation, depicted in a mirror, for example, in the cave site I mentioned earlier, or even there's a text that described the ideal monastery. Those texts. Actually, if you read it, it's very similar to how imperial city, or palatial complex was built.
So. And was there a strong monastic tradition before Buddhism's arrival? Did it sort of have to sort of create its own, or was it borrowing from older Chinese traditions?
That is actually pretty. It's not an easy question to answer just because we don't really have a lot of records about what kind of religious buildings that were built for indigenous religions for Chinese prior to the arrival of Buddhism. And actually, for example, we all know in China in the past, when you say indigenous Chinese religion, we oftentimes refer to Taoism. Right. So, in Taoism, yes, the traces and also the ideas, philosophy, and kind of basic concepts of Taoism were already there prior to the arrival of Buddhism. Right? But Taoism, for example, Taoism for a long time didn't really use image. There's a sense of presence, but not a visual representation. Right. So, but once Buddhism arrived with the worship of icons, and then Taoism began to produce their own icons. So these two religions actually kind of mutually kind of influence each other. So when you say what kind of the architectural or religious precedents that can lend some kind of a model for Buddhism, I would say actually not a whole lot, right? So and that's the reason why when you read the description of the Buddhist monastic complex, when you read out details about that, and then you turn around, you read the description of the residential buildings, the imperial or palatial complex, you see a lot of similarities, right? So the difference is really not the architecture complex itself, is how the space is being used, right? So and sometimes even that spatial hierarchy will be similar as well, So the palatial complex and the monastic complex, like we just discussed earlier, the one is the emperor, the other one is Buddha, and then either of the spaces was kind of designed to revolve around the most important presence of the one is the emperor, the other one is the Buddha.
And within the monasteries, that center point, would that be an icon or a relic or?
Yeah, when you say as relics or icons, we are talking about the material kind of substantiation of the presence of the. In my book, I first talked about presence. At first, the presence was felt, but not an actual thing. So
people had to bring and add the thing.
That's right. Yeah. So the moment of encountering of the sacred presence was so transitory. Someone saw it and then it was gone. By the end of the 7th century, then the first image of the Manjushri riding a lion.
Could you talk about them for a moment for people who haven't heard of them before?
Yeah, so Bodhisattva Manjushri is actually the residing deity of Mount Wutai, right? So, and then based on the sutra, he lived in this mountain and can be visited, and then he can show himself or in different disguises to the visitors or to believers, right? So, but the most typical the image or description of his presence is always he is seated on his holy animal, which is a lion. And then so the first iconic representation in actual material form of Manjushri riding a lion, based on record, was made toward the end of the 7th century. Right? Wow. So from there, then you begin to see, visitor went over there not only just to search for this presence, but then you actually have an icon there.
And so there's already been like a century or more of time between sort of the original presence, sort of the sense of place and sacredness. Before it's actually kind of substantiated physically.
Yeah. And then also the legend of the first image was also quite telling, because the vision of the Bodhisattva was spotted by a lot of people, but they never really have a center with an icon to worship that image. So the monks in the monastery decided they want to make an icon based on all the visions people have. And then they hire a very skillful sculptor to do it. But the sculptor kept doing it, making the representation that were divine, but he couldn't really finish it. And every time when he was about to finish it, and then the sculpture were cracked. So and then he reported to the monk and say, I couldn't do it. I need to have the presence of the Bodhisattva in order to do it. And eventually, the Bodhisattva miraculously appeared in front of the sculptor, and then the first image was made. So it's actually the first image was made after the miraculous presence, in the vision of the sculptor, right? So you can find the same story in the West as well, in the biblical stories. So the Jesus, the mother and child image was made precisely with this kind of the vision.
Yeah.
Right. So,
and actually bringing up this sort of comparison, it's something that I thought about too, with the opening of the book when you discuss the meaning of a mountain in Chinese history, thinking about Mount Olympus, Mount Sinai.
That's right. Yes.
Mountains even in like Native American religious belief systems. It's very cool that it's such a cross-cultural sort of motif of the meeting point of the what would you say, the sacred and the profane.
That's right. Yeah. So for this project, it's actually pretty fun for me, just because the more I did it, the better I understand this is not a singular practice in the world.
Yeah.
You can find so many parallels, and then it's a part of the kind of the pattern, religious pattern or mode that happened in almost all the major religions, right? So,
and it was really cool to think about for me while reading this, the way the arrival of Buddhism shifted the structures of society. And I was thinking first about when you discuss the way that it kind of moved China to be a new pole of a Buddhist world, and not solely centered on India anymore. Well, I guess a question is, do we have any records of the pilgrimages people would have taken to the mountain?
You mean the pilgrimage route?
Yeah. Do we know like how far people might have come from?
Yeah, when you get to the Tang Dynasty, especially after the legendary first icon was made.
Yeah.
Right. So you can see how this story or how this narrative of Sacred Mountain was made. Once you have the image, this Sacred Mountain code really spread. Internationally. So then you begin to see the records of the pilgrims from not only India, also from Tibet, also from Korea, and also Japan. And then once they came over there, of course they want to, to experience the sacred presence themselves in person.
Yeah.
If they can't really have that religious experience, at least they can go to the different mountains the different monasteries in the mountain to worship the icons.
Yeah.
Right. So you have the legendary first icon, and then all other temples in Mount Wutai made their icons by copying after the first one. So, and then the visitor, after they went over there, there's a couple of things they can bring back. One is there's some painters will be there. You could find painters will make image of the Sacred Mountain for you. Yeah, and they can bring it back, and they can worship that representation.
Yeah,
and then that's kind of an indirect way for you to connect to the Sacred Mountain. And then later on, we'll begin to see the Bodhisattva Manju's riding a lion, the sculpture, this kind of particular iconographic form, popping up in different places.
It's crazy to think about the scale of that. I mean, I think people are used to thinking about especially the early Middle Ages and late antiquity as being so local by comparison to the world we live in today. And in many ways that was true, but like from say northern India to Korea is more than the distance of the continental United States from east to west. And that's the range from which people are converging on this one center.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
That's really amazing to think about.
Yeah. So, and then I think, when we talk about Buddhism at large, right? So, and then the Buddhism in China or entire East Asia, belongs to the kind of the school of original Buddhism called Mahayana Buddhism, versus Theravada Buddhism in the Southeast Asia.
Yeah.
Right. So, so and how that happened, so how Buddhism was transmitted over land, and then it could be accepted and worshipped and then practiced throughout entire East Asia. And then I think Sacred Mountain Code was part of that. Right, so it draws all the believers to the mountain, and they begin to see the network formed. Right, so and even as the Japanese monks, several of them, there are records about their visit to Mount Wutai. They converse with the monks at Mount Wutai, and then for example, there's the Tiantai sect in Japan is called Tendai. So it's a very important sect. The Mount Wutai also has the comparable sects in there. So they came over there, and then they have dialogues, and then eventually they brought back some of the sutras and the image of the Bodhisattva.
Yeah.
Right. So, and that started the Sacred Mountain Code in Japan as well.
Wow.
Yeah. And then Japanese Buddhists continue to come over to China throughout the entire duration of Tang Dynasty.
When Buddhism began to take hold in China, did it rewrite anything about sort of the norms and the social rules that society operated under? I'm thinking of how, for instance, when Christianity spread through pagan Europe, it came with certain prescriptions for how and where someone could worship, what sorts of marriages were acceptable. It changed the structure of day-to-day life for people. Did Buddhism have any kind of impact of that kind?
Yeah, for sure. I think, the other than Buddhism, and earlier we discussed that indigenous Chinese religion would be Taoism.
Yeah. And
Taoism actually, alongside with Buddhism, also developed throughout the Tang Dynasty. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then the imperial court often has been pulled by,
sort of a tension between the two.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So very powerful, Buddhist monks and very powerful Taoist monks all worked at the court to try to influence, the emperor. So both are very, very clear, the medieval China, and then when we say Tang Dynasty, basically, squarely in the medieval time in China. So religion was very, very important.
Yeah.
Yeah. Once it passed this time, then get to the Song Dynasty. Then we have the Neo-Confucianism, and then you have this kind of the mixture of religion and Confucianism together. Mm-hmm. So, but that was not there yet in Tang Dynasty. So religion was so important, and then, but that's also a time when we say during Tang Dynasty, Buddhism became more Chinese. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then oftentimes the term that we use is called Sinicization. Yeah. So Buddhism was Sinicized into a very Chinese form, right? So even you can't really recognize Chinese Buddhism from an Indian Buddhist perspective, but Buddhism actually brought in a lot of things early on, from 2nd century CE all the way to before the 7th century CE, before Tang Dynasty started. Many things happened, right? So, for example, in Buddhism, it's a great sense of encouraging you to become monks, to trade the Buddha's path, to emulate yourself after Buddha's career, right? So become a monk and then take the Bodhisattva vow and then practice Buddhist way, right? So and what do? You have to leave home, just like Buddha. Leave home and you go to the Buddhist order and then practice that way. And then the mountain temples were great places for those purposes, right? So, but then you have this conflict from Buddhist perspective and Chinese kind of traditional perspective. In Chinese traditional perspective, leaving home is not right. You're supposed to be in home to serve your parents, right? So, so you have this kind of the basic kind of moral value conflicts, right? So, and when Buddhism was really strong in China, the Buddhist order continued to draw the population into the religion, right? So even to a point where the state feel uncomfortable, and then also there's a lot of ways the Chinese traditional kind of views need to compromise with this new religion, right? So, but when we get to Tang Dynasty, like I say, it really become part of the culture itself already. Yeah. So, but you still see the conflicts. Yeah. And then another thing, for example, the ritual worship with the icons. Like I say, prior to Buddhist arrival, there was no iconic worship, right? So, and then later on, even for ancestral worship, in the prior to Buddhist arrival, ancestral worship was so essential, right? That's kind of the way the family, kind of extensive family can be tied together. And they begin to see, the iconic worship also got into that.
Right.
Well.
So the way familial worship happens kind of gets imprinted by the way that it's done in Buddhism.
That's right. Yeah. So
that's really interesting. There's an interesting sort of way in which I think I think a lot of historians and anthropologists and people in those sorts of disciplines, they expect to find something like social inequality expressed through material wealth as like kind of its primary expression. And is it wrong to say that Buddhism, even, you know, in medieval China and in, you know, late antiquity, like in the Tang Dynasty, had an element of asceticism, an attempt at detachment from luxury, from
I think the question itself can be answered from different angles. To become a monk, you have to denounce all your attachment to the secular world.
But they still wielded a lot of influence at the court and in society, and they were this center point for pilgrimage. So yeah, it's interesting the way, on the one hand, they're eschewing the material inequality, but they're still wielding power and influence and a status that doesn't come from gold.
Yeah. It is ironic to some extent. You can see the contradiction, you know, because you come in two different directions. One is about being religious. You have to kind of renounce all the belongings and all your attachment to the world.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, the Buddhist order was actually quite rich. Right. So because through a lot of donations, all that, right? So, and then, the sutra itself also encouraged that. You know,
oh, really?
So if you donate to build a temple building, or donate to have an image made, it's gonna increase your karma, your good karma. So that's gonna go to your future, right? So, then you'll have a better reincarnation in your next life, right? And then, and a lot of Buddhists actually would do that, voluntarily, just kind of to accrue more merits. And then in Buddhism, there's a mechanism where you can actually transfer those merits to your deceased parents. You know, and that worked really well for Chinese because, you know, we have very strong kind of sense of ancestral worship. We always want to honor the deceased parents, grandparents, or your ancestors. So the current Buddhists in the Tang Dynasty will try very hard to do that. You know, so donating money to the order itself, and then to build, you know, the new buildings, and then even to gild the old icons and make new icons, right? So those things are very material. But the Buddhist order didn't really reject them because they need to survive. They need to be competitive at court. We do see this kind of the two sides, but at the same time, you know, the piety, you know, we say, so your religious piety cannot be shown. Well, yes, you can show that with your behavior. But at the same time, a lot of times the material means becomes quite important if I actually donate something.
Right.
So, I turn my kind of invisible kind of religious mind into something that can be substantiated in the material form. Yeah. So like you say, gold is very important. You know, so, and then the gildings, when you see the gold gild on a bronze statue, everything is shiny, all that, you probably say, well, that's probably too excessive, right? But at the same time, in the sutra, there's a lot of stories about, you know, the Buddha image actually kind of emit lights over, you know, in different directions. Yeah. And gild will give you that kind of quality. Yeah. Kind of dim light, you have a torch and then get close to the image. You begin to see a shimmering quality. Yeah. That quality enlivened the image as well. Yeah. Even the icon itself is a material form, right? So if you really want to go extreme with the essential, kind of the detachment from materiality. We won't need the images at all. But the truth is not that. In sutra, oftentimes, the canon will give you an impression that if you want to donate, you know, it will help you if you donate to make an image with any material or any size, as long as that's from your heart. Then you'll benefit from that deed, right? But in reality, you can see the competition among the Buddhists. You want to make the largest one, more, you know, with the best material. Seems like, you know, when you make a class of Buddha, then, you know, the merit that you can get will be proportionally large. So I think, you know, the religion itself also, and I think it's any kind of religion of the world. You can't really talk about religions, even the practice, without touching on materials substantiation. Religion itself.
Is the mountain still an active force in Buddhism today?
Yeah, it's still very important. But the sectarian nature has evolved over time. And then if you compare the sects that are very active right now as Mount Wutai with those during Tang Dynasty, so during Tang Dynasty, it's more Mahayanist. But right now it's more Tibetan Buddhist. So you see, that's right, yeah. So, and then it happened around like Yuan Dynasty, and then Tibetans kind of began to take over the entire mountains. And then there's a long story about that. In their own canons, they also have a description about their sacred mountain in the northeast. And then they also identify Mount Wutai was it, right? So in Tibetan Buddhism, also the Bodhisattva were reincarnated into the very important teacher or Dalai Lama. So they are reincarnated Bodhisattva, right? So, and then Mount Wutai is a domicile of the Bodhisattva Manjushri. So the Tibetan Buddhists saw this connection from Tang Dynasty onwards, and then slowly kind of take over the entire sacred mountain.
It's cool to see sort of this like sequence of people of new traditions moving in, but with the same sort of intuition for there being a sacredness to the mountain, and then building themselves into the existing landscape.
I think it's so essential right now for our studies about sacred mountains. You are looking at one layer, historical layer. Of the mountain.
You're looking at layer upon layer.
Layer upon layers, and then see how the layers, sometimes the interconnectedness is quite important. Different layers, they actually, kind of have the interactions.
Right, it's not just like sort of a hard line.
That's right. Yeah, it's not like a super stripe.
They're all knit together.
That's right, they're knit together to some extent. Yeah, so I think today, even in my teaching, my book doesn't really involve so much. It's how we will be able to, not to use the late 19th century colonial framework to understand an East Asian religion. It was not any more mythical. It still has very strong sense of material aspect. Right. So Buddhism is not all about spiritual, quality. It's like I say, even the monks, they are very just like one of us, right? So they are enjoying all the secular conveniences, all that stuff, right? So I think that's also quite important. The stories that we try to tell in a book, like what I do in my book, it's not just to tell a story about the religion only. It's how this religion is part of the entire history of medieval China, right? So I really hope people can begin to see from these directions, to see how this religion was a living tradition, was a practical religion. For example, the Vedic worship and Buddhism back to probably 50, 70 years ago were separately discussed because Westerners refuse to recognize that. It's like, the Vedics, that they are so nitty gritty, so corporeal. Right?
It's not like ethereal or detached enough.
And then Buddhism has to, so spiritual and all about the philosophical discourses. But I think, through the efforts of scholars in the past 20, 30 years or so, I think more and more people come to terms with the Buddhist materiality. So I think that would be kind of a few aspects that I would encourage our listeners or people whoever is interested in Buddhism to take.
Well, with that said, Dr. Lin, thank you for taking the time. I really appreciate it.
Sure.
This was really cool.
Yeah, it's fun. Thank you so much.
And thank you for listening to this episode of The Tell. Until next time. Hey everybody. If you enjoyed the podcast and you want to help me talk to more people in more places, please consider donating. You can do so on my Patreon as a recurring donor, as well as on my website if you'd rather do a one-time donation. The links are patreon.com/Sebastian Weatherby and www.sebastianweatherby.com. Show notes are also available on my website, where you can find citations and comments and other relevant information about the things we talked about today. Thanks again for listening.